So one of the things that I might want to do is I might want to disable buttons if a user hasn't filled in a form correctly. This is pretty common. So one of the things you could do with a button is to end up putting a disabled value on the button, and I could specify disabled equals disabled. Now if I go over to this page, I'll see that that button is disabled. Let's actually make these things show up on multiple lines. Let's actually specify if you are an input or a button. We're going to end up making you a bit taller, and let's also just make the width 100%. So you go all the way over to the end here. And so here I've got my button and it's disabled. Well, what I might want to do is I might want to make it enabled when the user starts putting a value in here. But I don't want to start out with an error message. I don't want to really, in a sense, bang the user over the head, giving them an error message if they haven't even started filling out the form. I mean, maybe I could put something in here that it's required. Maybe I could put in a placeholder. Enter foo value over here. But one of the things that I could do, there's another event that I can end up using. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my input, and I'm going to use document query selector. And I could actually grab this just by using input, but let's say I had more than one input on the page. One of the things you could do is I could use this selector to say this is going to be the name where I have the value foo. And I always like to see that I found something just by console log input. So I'll see that show up. So at least I could see that I ended up finding this value. And what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to add an event listener. But the event listener here is going to be every time the user ends up typing something in the field. And this is pretty powerful because what I could end up doing here is I could look at the value that they ended up typing in. And if I do a console.log and I do ev.target.value, I'll see the value that they ended up typing in. If I start typing in here, I'll see those values as they start changing. So one of the things I might want to do is maybe I want to have a div here, and let's give this an ID of error, because I assume we're going to have more than one div that's on the page. And let's just go over here and we'll say that if you're an error, we are going to make the color red, and let's make the font size, let's make it pretty big. So one of the things that I could end up doing here is I could just ask the question on key up and ask, hey, look, if ev.target.value, if there's a value there, if you put something there. Now again, if this was validation and it needed to be an email, I could do something else. But what I could do here is I can end up, doing the same thing here and grab my error message. And this is going to be a query selector of error message. So I'm just calling it error. So I'm just going to grab it with the ID error. And here I could say if there's a value, do something. Let's actually do the reverse. If there's no value, we're going to say error message equals .inner HTML. Value for foo is required. Now if I refresh this and I change the value and I come back, I'll see that this ends up showing up. Again, it doesn't show up at the beginning because I don't have anything there. But if a user starts to type and they end up taking the value out, I'll see that show up. So I would like it to go away when they start typing again. So let's just put an else here. And we could specify error.message.inner HTML equals an empty value. So if someone types in, then they type away, then they type in again, the message goes away. The other thing that I would like to do is that if this form is valid, I want to give the user an indication that they can submit the form. So a quick way to do this is to just say, hey, look, if in fact there's no value, what I could end up doing is I can grab my button. So now I want to actually interact with my button. And so again, I'm going to use the document query selector. So based on what the values are in these fields, what I could end up doing is specifying, hey, look, if this form is not going to end up getting submitted, I could say button, add attribute, disabled, disabled. Now this is not going to mean anything if I don't do the reverse and say if this form is ready to be submitted, I'm going to say button remove attribute. And here I only have to give the name. So now what this is going to end up doing is going to give some feedback to the user. When they end up typing in a value, they'll see that they can end up clicking on save here to do something. When they go over here and they start taking the data out, they'll see that this ends up showing up. And let's just fix this. It's not add attribute. I got that wrong. It's set attribute. So let's make sure that that works. Hello. And if we end up going here, it ends up removing it, so you can't submit the form, and the value shows here. So it's really just a crude way of using the DOM to give the user some feedback and to enable and disable certain controls based on how the form is filled out.